Hello, community. My name is Catherine Jura. I am a community health educator, and I am your host for this podcast. I created Hello Community because of the current epidemic of social isolation and loneliness that's being reported across the globe. 1 out of every 2 Americans says they are lonely. And prolonged loneliness can lead to chronic illness, being worse, mental and physical illness, and premature death. The hopeful news is that social connection and community are significant healing factors in this epidemic. So during this podcast, our guests will be sharing their stories of how they created social connection and community for themselves. Today, I am honored to welcome Marilyn Dyer of North Greenbush, New York. I have known Marilyn for many years, and she has developed many social connections and community, including redeveloping community after some significant life changes.
Yes.
So welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you, Catherine.
So why don't we begin with, what does it mean to you to have a sense of community?
I think that it is a group of people. It doesn't matter where they come from, but with whom you can share ideas, feel safe, feel supported, feel loved, share possibly common goals, and just have this group that you feel comfortable with and that you can be yourself with.
And how does it feel to you when you have that sense of community?
Nurturing. Again, supported. You can be real with them. You can share whatever's going on in your life with them. Judgment-free.
Judgment-free.
Very, very important. And hopefully it's a group of people with whom you share common goals, common ideas, sense of mission maybe. Just people that you're really comfortable with.
Does it leave you with a sense of safety?
Yes.
In the world?
Yes, definitely, because you know that they've got your back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have shared with me that you've had some life events when you've lost your sense of community. How did that feel to lose your community?
Disorienting, lonely, challenging, sad. You kind of feel adrift. You're not quite sure what direction to take.
Yeah. Okay, so would you like to share with our listeners, start with an early time when you built community, when you had to move or...
Yeah. I grew up on Long Island, and I had a very close group of friends there. We kind of lost touch when we all went off to college because in those days we did not have instant communication as we do today. You had to either write a letter, which of course was time consuming, or make a phone call, a long distance phone call, which was expensive. And as we were all still on our parents' dime, especially in college, that was frowned upon greatly. So you lost your immediate connection with your close friends. And again, we were only high school kids at that point. And then when I got married in 1968, I moved up here to this area, the Albany area, with my husband. And I only had his friends. And they were not a large group. We were both working at that point. I had dropped out of school. He was still going to college. And other than hanging out at a bar once in a while, None of us had a place where we could gather. We all had teeny tiny apartments. And so I made some friends with his friends, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same. One girlfriend that I became very close to, we both, when we had children, we got even closer. But it wasn't quite the same.
As the community you had left.
Yeah. Mostly because, I know this is going to sound odd, but they were kind of imposed on me.
The friends here.
Yeah. Because they were the only people that I knew. I did make a few friends at work. I worked for the telephone company, and I made a very, very good lifelong friend there. But she was single, I was married. Again, it's just a totally different time as far as how you socialized and your opportunities to be together and do things. And none of us had any money, so. Yeah.
So how did you start to develop your community here?
It really wasn't until I met some gals on my block after we bought our first home. And they invited me to come to an exercise class at the church. It was a community exercise class, and I just clicked with so many of the gals in that group. We all had young children. We were mostly stay-at-home moms at that point, because that's what you did back then. And we formed Bible studies, and we formed women's consciousness raising groups, and we would babysit each other's kids, and we started a collaborative daycare. We called it Mother's Little Helper to combat child abuse, because some moms just were out of their minds with their children, and so we got together, and once a week the moms could go out for a couple of hours, do whatever they needed to do, and a group of us would stay and watch the children. And it really, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And that was the core of my community in those days. And quite frankly, many of those women are still my friends. So.
And when you were sharing about what community meant to you, you were saying things like shared sense of purpose or direction. And here, the children, sounds like the children brought you together, and that was helping each other out with daycare and time out. And would you say that was one of the main shared sense of
That's how it started.
Connection.
That's how it started. And then we got into more I would call it mission-based projects. We would get together and make favors to take over to the nursing home. We'd go over to the nursing home, a group of us, and we'd play with the older people, of which I am now one. And we did Meals on Wheels. I mean, we really had a sense of mission, and we could do it together because together we had the resources. And it was very fulfilling. And it's interesting, Catherine, I think that, thinking about it just now, I think that one of the things that I was missing in the years before I got involved with this group of women, I did not have a purpose. I mean, other than the kids, but I didn't feel like I had a purpose, and I always was the kind of person that wanted to have a purpose.
Oh. Well, and some authors that I am reading on the subject of loneliness and social isolation and community talk about three kinds of loneliness. Psychological, like where is my connection with someone? Societal, where's my group? And existential, what's my purpose?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So then you then you got married again to a pastor and was the pastor's wife, and then you had another significant life change.
You mean being the pastor's wife?
Yeah, so maybe talk for a minute about the community you formed as the pastor's wife, and then when you lost that.
Right. Well, many of the women that I had been friends with actually were members of the congregation. And then I met many, many more women through the congregation. I got involved with the women's organization, the larger women's organization from the church. So I had another community of women from that group.
Again, same purpose,
Yeah.
mutual purpose.
Yep. Formed some very, very, very close friendships among the women that were members at the church. And I was involved in community things, and I got involved. I was singing at that point, both in church and outside of church. And I don't know, everything just kind of seemed to fall into place at that point. My husband was very, very supportive. My second husband, very supportive of all my endeavors. And the church community obviously became very important. Was involved in many of the ministries, his ministries.
As the pastor's wife.
As the pastor's wife. And and because I was involved in a lot of things, I got to meet a lot of different people in a lot of different areas of church ministry. So I really felt almost overwhelmed with community. So many people in my life at that point. And so many people in and out of our home all the time, and situations that would arise. And I don't know, I really started to take care of a much larger community.
Maybe pause there before you go on to what happened after Lee passed. Was talking about the definition of community. What do we call it when we have a community here and a community there and a community there? For you inside yourself, was it all one big community? You just thought, wow, my community is church and this women's group and.
I would say so.
Yeah.
They had little different tags on them, but it was my community, and obviously mostly women.
Interesting.
Mostly women.
And so it was a building. You started out with the community this size, and then you met these folks because of that encounter, and that they kind of came into the community circle and continued to.
It was almost exponential. It would be like, all right, let's say I had 3 girlfriends, but they had friends, and then I would meet those friends, and then we would, it just kept growing and growing and growing, and a lot of people, sometimes almost too many.
Yeah, I'm
almost
hearing
too
that.
many people in our life.
Part of that could have been as the life of a pastor.
Yeah.
And pastor's wife.
Sure.
Yeah. So, would you like to share what happened when Lee passed?
Yeah. Well, we were married 25 years, and we discovered that he had colon cancer, and he died in about a 3-year period after the discovery of that. And he was the kind of person who stuck with everything that he was doing until the bitter end. He actually preached Christmas Eve, 2004, and died February 2005. So he was a sick cookie, but he just wouldn't stop. So not only did I lose him, did our family lose him, but the congregation lost him. And he was a counselor. He helped so many people find a better way to live their own lives, and we were all devastated. And because in some ways he was so good at keeping going, people did not realize how sick he was, which kind of was unfair of him to not be more honest about that. But I kind of think he was in denial myself that.
So the community didn't see it coming. You saw it coming, but the community didn't see it coming.
Not as quickly as it actually came. And
as the minister's wife, you held a lot of positions within this church community.
Right.
And then when he passed, that role changed.
Sure, because
That was the big life change
that
there.
was a huge life change. First of all, obviously being in grief, I absented myself for a while just because I couldn't face being at church on Sundays. It was just too wrenching for me. And once, of course, in that, his death threw the congregation into, well, what do we do now? Who's going to be our pastor? And the church, in our church, the Lutheran church, they just don't send somebody immediately. It's a collaborative effort whereby we let the synod, which is the let's say the governmental part of the church, that we need a pastor, and they would start looking, and then they would send us a candidate, and if that one just didn't seem right for either of us, then either the pastor or the congregation, then we'd move on to another one. And we had what's called an intentional interim, which means that they did send us a pastor that was only going to be with us for maybe a year or two until we got our feet back on the ground, and then we would move into calling a full-time pastor, or not full-time, but a permanent pastor. And quite honestly, it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years that we have actually found our footing again with our pastor, who came about 5 years ago, and Lee's been gone 20 years. So there was a huge gap in that time where we all felt this incredible sense of loss, because he was our leader, you know, he was the one who formed many of our community groups, whether it was through a class or just Sunday morning or ministries that he was leading. So what do we do? What do we do with ourselves?
So the community was at a loss of community for the community.
Yeah.
And also for you, as the pastor's wife, you had certain jobs that you did that you could no longer do because you were no longer the pastor's wife.
Well,
so was that part of your loss of community also?
Yes. Also, Lee was a very hands-on leader. He was very involved in all of the major missions of the congregation, and of course he came from a different generation of pastor too. And now the way that it works more is that the pastor may have an idea, or the council may have an idea, but the congregation is the one that leads and figures out how it's going to work and who's going to be involved. It's not quite so pastor-centric anymore. And that took quite a while we figured out that we needed like 8 committees to do what Lee did, just all, between the two of us.
Between the two of you,
own,
right. So then did you find yourself, over the course of years, you found a new place for yourself, a new role or a new what for yourself in this new community?
Yes. Well, again, I had stepped back from many of the things that I was doing, partly because of grief and partly because I realized that I just couldn't do those anymore because I didn't have that position anymore. And gradually over the years, I picked up some of those jobs that I had given up. But it is a policy of the church that when a pastor retires or when a pastor dies, although most pastors don't die, as I say, in the saddle. That was a very unusual thing. Most pastors have retired and then they die. Lee died while he was still working. Almost as if he had been hit by a car or something. That was the shock of it. So normally when a pastor retires, they're not supposed to come back to that congregation because What happens is the congregation still looks to that pastor for leadership, for funerals, for whatever, their relationship with him has been established. And the new pastor, can have trouble with that. And also, it's not a good transition for that new pastor. So, very lovingly and with great consideration, the council let the synod know that under no circumstances was I not going to be allowed to stay in the congregation. That they said absolutely not. This is her church home. This is her community. Which we're going to kick her out, and then she's going to have to go and find. So none of that happened, which was a very moving and life-affirming decision that they made on my behalf. Yeah, it was beautiful. It was beautiful.
So one last question here. For some folks, it seems like for you, although there was some angst in moving, say, up here when you first came up and finding your way, and then after Lee passed, for some people, it's very difficult to walk into a new situation, whether it's a gym class or a church or a painting class or a Tai Chi class.
Yeah.
That keeps some people out of community. Did you have any of those feelings of being scared, and how you worked through that? The loneliness drew you into these groups, and then you created your communities. Did you have any, fear and worry about, will I fit in, and how will I fit in, and how will I connect? And if so, how you worked with that? Or was that just not part of your story?
Well, I was in my 50s already by the time that I lost Lee. So I think that those kinds of feelings, which I had piles of when I was younger, in my 20s, in my 30s, yes, absolutely, I would have been paralyzed with fear. Even the first time I walked into the exercise class here, I was nervous.
Could you speak to that for our listeners who think, well, that all sounds really fun, but I'm really scared to walk into a group of new people? Could you share how you work that inside yourself?
Well, the first thing that I was lucky enough to have were two girlfriends that were in the class already. So I had that entree that I went with them. And that's not a bad idea. If you have a friend that's involved in a group that you might be interested in, maybe it's not quite your thing, but go with them and just explore that. Whatever, it could be spelunking, it could be mountain climbing, it could be just taking walks, it could be gardening, it doesn't matter what it is. A bike riding group. You get into a group that are doing the same thing that you want to do, and then you don't have to talk to everybody the first, second, third time you're there. You can stick with your one friend. They probably already know other people in the group, and they'll say, oh, John, this is my friend Bernie or whatever, and he's new to the group, and help him, maybe you can help him get, even if you don't do it in front of your friend, if you do it behind closed doors, like my friend's really shy, can you help him get acclimated? But definitely tagging along with a friend is definitely a much easier way to introduce yourself to a new community.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful for our listeners, that can be just almost paralyzing and keep folks from reaching out when they're desperately lonely and want to, but scared to connect, feel vulnerable.
Right.
And
what if you walk in the door and for some reason you immediately hate whatever's going on there? I mean,
you leave.
And that's the thing that I think when you get older, I think is helpful. It's that, excuse me, I remember when my mother was probably in her late 80s, she would go out for a walk every day. And her feet really bothered her. And we said, Mom, why don't you get yourself a really good pair of walking sneakers, right? And she said, oh my gosh. She said, can you imagine me, 85 years old, in sneakers? Everybody would be looking at me. And I was like, Mom, you're 85 years old. You're taking a walk on a street where there probably isn't even anybody to see you. What makes you think that anybody is going to be looking at your feet, your sneakers? It had nothing to do with the other people. It had to do with my mom. You know, she was conscious of that. And not that she wasn't adorable and people might have been looking at her, but they would be saying, oh, look, isn't that great? Look at that very elderly lady, you know, still out there walking. I think that those, and I do think that those concerns about how am I going to fit in? People are going to be looking at me. If you have those feelings, they probably had those feelings when they walked in the door. You're not alone in that. And
Nice.
And what's the worst that can happen? You walk into a group, it's not for you. You say to your friend, if that's how you got there, you know, it's really just not for me. I'm not going to come anymore. Okay. That's your decision. No one's going to think badly of you. You have to take that little bit of a risk. And as you get older, it does get easier. I really find it gets easier.
Do you have, in closing, a sense of what's happened inside of you from that 20-year-old to that 50-year-old that made it easier?
Wow. I think probably it was taking those risks that I did take earlier on, and when you find that nothing horrible is going to happen to you, or that, I'll tell you a little story. First time I got up to read a lesson in church, I was terrified, and I would have been in my mid-30s at that point. Absolutely terrified. My knees physically knocking together. The lectern going like this because it wasn't even. The red coming up my face. The sweat pouring. I was so scared. And then, of course, I was lucky enough to get the Bible lesson that had the word fornication in it. So, you know, that was even worse. But you know what? Nothing happened to me. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, you did so good. You read so well. You didn't seem nervous. And I was like, oh. And you know what? After that first time, it just got easier and easier and easier and easier. And now at this point in my life, here I am doing a podcast with you, and nothing scares me as far as that's concerned anymore. It just doesn't. And you just have to do it a couple of times.
I think that's really helpful to honor the scariness. If the first time is scary and you don't need to go back, then you honor that. Or is it a try it a couple times thing?
Right.
I think you shared a lot of real life experience. That's why I invited you as my first guest, because I knew you had a lot, and that's where I wanted to start with Hello Community. From, scared to death, knees knocking, to you're on every board. You're now the president of the board of your church. I mean, that's what can happen. But it wasn't without some scariness, it really was a walk for you. Yeah. From that scared to trying, to this committee, adding to that committee, to now your world is so big and so full.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And blessedly so.
And blessedly so. Yeah. In closing, would you like to say anything to our listeners? Anything further? Just do it. If there's something that you think would interest you or that you could contribute to, go with a friend, see how you like it. If you don't like it, don't go back. You might find something, though, that, as in my case, really changed my life. And nobody's looking at you. Perfect. Thank you so much. If you would like some additional online support around the subject of connecting and building community, do check out Project Unlonely by Dr. Jeremy Nobel.
Great resource. You'll find yourself there. And one of the coolest things they're doing is they're doing very short, 5 minutes, videos, animated, about situations in our lives where we find ourselves alone or lonely or disconnected, and ideas of how to move into community and connection. I love that online support. And he also has a book called Project Unlonely. And if you found this podcast helpful, please do subscribe. Also pass the link along to your friends, because so together we can support each other to lives of social connection and community. The content of this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical or mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please always seek the advice of a qualified healthcare professional or mental health provider for any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concern.